Hello and welcome to Volume 3 of the Blood Tapes, the series in which I examine footage from the 2022 Hospital Liaison Committee's video seminar. So we're learning a great deal about how Jehovah's Witnesses manage cases involving blood transfusions, specifically the role of hospital liaison committees in essentially interfering with medical care involving Jehovah's Witnesses wherever blood transfusions may be an issue. We're working our way through this video conference, and now we are up to an item titled Handling Medical Cases, a Step-by-Step Approach. Immediately I have a problem just with the title. Handling medical cases. Not being on hand to advise as to the position of Jehovah's Witnesses, but literally handling medical cases, a step-by-step approach. And it's being given by an elder named Wayne Sorsby in the UK. So let's get this video up and we'll see whether everything's working. By the way, if there are any issues with sound or anything like that, or video, speak now or forever hold your peace.
Our program has already mentioned the fact that training others brings joy, doesn't it? And I'm sure you brothers have found that to be the case. But it can also be said that training others is particularly relevant to this, as members of the HLC, is absolutely vital to the work of the Hospital Liaison Committee. We know the guidelines mentions it's the HLC chairman who arranges the training of new HLC members. Now, let's just note that's the chairman who arranges the training. He doesn't do all the training, but he arranges for the training of HLC members. What is an important aspect of that training? Well, as a foundation, it must involve a thorough study of all the published information that we have relating to our scriptural position. It's why we have the assignment, isn't it? Because it's a scriptural issue. That would include the following matters: the matters of patient choice, conscience, medical use of a patient's own blood, and of course, fractions or plasma derivatives.
It isn't really, I mean, we're only like a minute or so in, and he's already talking about patient choice. And as I've explained ad nauseum on this channel, there is no patient choice for Jehovah's Witnesses. You are threatened with estrangement. It's in the elders manual that HLC elders will have in their briefcase under the heading disassociation. You will be shunned by Jehovah's Witnesses if you willfully and unrepentantly accept a blood transfusion. And that's before we even consider the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses believe that receiving blood is a sin, and that everyone who commits a sin is worthy of death at an impending Armageddon. So where's the choice in all of that?
Now, it's crucial that a trainer helps a newer member to develop the ability to reason on the following, to reason on Bible principles that relate to our stand, and secondly, to accurately explain our position, particularly we think perhaps of interactions with clinicians in this regard.
So he's immediately said our position. It's the role of HLCs to accurately explain our position. So how is it a case of individual choice if he's already, in the same breath almost, talking in terms of it being our position? How can it be something where individual Jehovah's Witnesses truly get to decide whether they receive a blood transfusion or not?
So we mentioned that this is a foundation of the training. So building on that foundation then, what will help all on the HLC, but of course newer HLC members, to handle cases effectively? Well, we're going to consider 4 points in this part. Number one is the tools that we have that can help us to handle cases and how we can use them. Then we'll look at a step-by-step example, and what we're also going to do, which is good, is to revisit a video from Seminar 4 that will really give us some excellent teaching points about key steps in handling medical cases.
Spoiler alert, the video that will be revisited is the video that we watched in Volume 1. So we're going to be seeing clips from the HLC dramatization video that was featured in Volume 1. So there will be a little bit of repetition, but it's going to be interesting to see that video revisited in the context of it being shown to HLC elders and contextualized with further information.
Thirdly, we're going to mention and emphasize the fact that training must be ongoing. And fourthly, in view of the nature of our assignment, the spiritual nature, it's the importance of prayer in handling cases. Let's consider our first point then, tools to handle medical cases. Now, needless to say, it is essential that HLC members develop the skills needed to use the tools effectively, various tools that have been provided. And by way of repetition, we're just going to mention two things that have already been mentioned in the program so far. Firstly is the HLC 6, that's the the flowchart HLC involvement during a medical emergency. This is a step-by-step guide. And isn't it good in just flagging areas of consideration in determining how best to handle a case? Allied to that, the medical emergency worksheet, the HLC 7. Do you remember discussing this in Seminar 4? Really been emphasized why we have this document. It's a prompt, isn't it? It helps us to gather the needed information, to ask appropriate questions. For example, information about the patient, their medical condition, even basic lab values that can help us to just notice a trend that may need addressing.
Wow. Okay. So this is Wayne Sorsby, an elder, and he's talking about these secret HLC documents that are key for HLC elders in handling medical cases. The first document he's mentioned is a flowchart. Ordinary rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses don't get to see this flowchart. And then he's talking about a worksheet that assists HLC elders in gathering information, including information about lab values. So very detailed medical information is to be harvested on this form with or without the consent of the patient, because there's actually a check mark on this form that says, has the patient requested to have HLC involvement? So the form gets filled in whether the patient wants HLC involvement or not. And here, according to Wayne Sorsby, it's important for untrained, unskilled elders to get the lab values so that they, who might be window cleaners or salesmen or whatever, so that they can spot patterns. This is the arrogance, ladies and gentlemen, of these people. They think they, first of all, get to handle medical cases, which is the title of this talk. And secondly, they think they should have an input when it comes to monitoring the lab values of a hospitalized patient. Astonishing.
Information that is going to be relevant to the case. And you'll have no doubt noticed that the HLC 7 and the HLC 6 are colour-coded, so they're designed to work together so that you brothers can use them as an effective tool to help you handle cases.
Probably the fact that they're color-coded will assist in some measure regarding the fact that these elders, again, have had zero medical training. The color coding will at least give them a bit of a head start in catching up on what would otherwise have been years and years of painstaking training and medical education.
Now, as a case progresses, or perhaps even as a case comes to a conclusion, documents that have been completed, for example, a fully completed HLC 7 form, can really serve as an excellent memory aid. Perhaps information we need to just file away, names of doctors who have been very, very helpful, key details that can be helpful after the event.
Yeah, let's file away that information. Let's not worry quite so much whether we have consent to file away that information. We'll just file it away anyway, and we'll hope that nothing bad happens.
Now, these tools will help the HLC to take the following 4 steps, and we're going to break these down further still. Number 1 is to gather the facts. Number 2, analyse the circumstances. 3 is determine needed action or assistance. And 4 is identify necessary follow-up. So let's revisit each one of those in turn, shall we? What about gathering the necessary facts? And bear in mind the theme for this part is a step-by-step approach. So what must be the first step that we take in handling a case? Well, right at the outset, it's to pray for Jehovah's assistance. So that as soon as the phone rings, which you brothers will be well familiar with doing, or you come to learn of a case, it's to pray for the assistance of the Holy Spirit.
I'm just going to pause there because, we're about a quarter of the way through and already my blood's boiling and I'm keeping an eye on the live chat. Thank you, by the way, to all of the lovely comments and hello to everyone who's joined. I'm noticing a comment that just helps contextualize all of this. So Kevin Johnson says, my dad died 3 weeks ago. I just found out he could have lived with a transfusion. Took him 2 days to die. I was not told until after his death. So this for me, this is why it's so important that we see this material and share it and make sure people see the extent of the invasion of patient privacy and patient choice. I cannot, I mean, Kevin, you have my deepest condolences, and it's lovely to see so many expressing their condolences in the live chat. Your father should still be with us. If what you say is true, that he could have lived with a transfusion. I mean, even if it was like a 50-50, your dad should have been able to roll the dice, This is what irritates me when you get kind of whataboutism thinking by Jehovah's Witness apologists. Oh, well, what about rare instances where there's been infected blood and blah, 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 the risks of taking blood. And again, it's whataboutism, because in the vast majority of cases, the blood has been adequately screened. There are no complications. But even if it were a 50-50 thing, which it isn't, it's definitely not a 50-50 thing as to whether blood is infected or kills you or harms you in any way. Even if it were a 50-50 thing, I'd take a 50% chance of living any day of the week. And Kevin's dad was denied this, who knows to what extent HLC goons were present at his hospital bed and were involving themselves in his care in the final 2 days during which he was dying. I suppose it's not worth kind of dwelling on it too much, because it's only going to be enraging, isn't it, for Kevin in particular, and upsetting. But it's just wrong. It's wrong. The theology itself is a hot mess, doesn't make any sense whatsoever, as I've explained repeatedly on the channel. And even if the theology were somehow sound, why can't Jehovah's Witnesses be left to make their own decisions? If they are being left to make their own decisions, why have a HLC? Why have a HLC? Why do you need elders at your bedside arguing with doctors on your behalf if it's really what you want? If it's really what you want, the doctors will respect your wishes. You have the right to decide. But there's no need whatsoever for HLC elders if it's truly about patient choice. They're only there as enforcers, to enforce the blood teaching. It's nothing to do whatsoever with helping the Jehovah's Witnesses themselves. So once again, sincerest condolences, Kevin, on your loss.
Now, what do the scriptures teach us about the Holy Spirit? Well, the words of Jesus assure us that the Holy Spirit was promised. He said that his Father would give it to those seeking to do his will. And we know that the Holy Spirit is powerful. The Holy Spirit is promised, and the Holy Spirit is powerful. And I'm sure you brothers can all too well testify to the assistance of the Holy Spirit in handling cases. So once we prayed to Jehovah from the outset, now we begin gathering the relevant information. What is a crucial second step? Well, it's to establish that the HLC assistance is actually being requested, either by the patient, by the clinician, or perhaps the family are requesting HLC assistance.
This is what I was saying earlier. It's just an afterthought. Has HLC presence been requested by the patient? Tick. Or not tick. It's on the form, as I've argued. If it's not been requested, why are you even filling out the form? Why are you filling out a form if you haven't been given express consent to gather information of a personal medical nature, if there's been no consent for your involvement in this medical situation? And he's just, again, repeated it there.
Again, as has already been mentioned, it's to establish the spiritual condition of the patient. Crucial that, isn't it? To determine what their standing is. Now Sorry, I'm just going to pause there.
My understanding is one of the reasons why they are so keen to understand the spiritual standing and the level of conviction of the patient is because they don't want to become too embroiled in the case if they can't be guaranteed that the patient is on side. So in other words, it kind of tarnishes them as a HLC if they throw everything behind, intimidating a patient or enforcing the blood teaching when the patient is a little bit shaky to begin with. So they want to find out early on in the process, is the patient on board with this? Does the patient adhere in principle to the blood teaching before we kind of roll our sleeves up and really get involved in this?
Essential And again, you brothers will appreciate this and come to appreciate this if you're newer to the HLC, that phone calls are not rushed. Now that's easier said than done, isn't it? So the phone rings, we find ourselves now handling a medical case, and needless to say, the person on the other end of the phone is going to be stressed. It is so crucial that we absorb some of that stress and not rush phone calls, because this is a crucial information gathering opportunity. So please, brothers, continue to take sufficient time to obtain a complete picture of the situation. Now, at times that may mean revisiting the phone call, so going away, perhaps discussing with another HLC member, obtaining more information, asking more questions. For example, what is the diagnosis? What is the condition of the patient? And crucially, what is the treatment plan? What is being proposed presently by way of treatment? Continue to take the time to gather that essential information, because of course, if we don't gather the right information, then we can make little mistakes and missteps, and of course we're not going to be as effective as we could be in giving assistance.
Well, the whole thing is a misstep. You know, sorry to tell you this, Wayne Salisbury, but you shouldn't be involving yourself in medical matters to begin with. But you're also speaking as though there's, you have all the time in the world. And this is kind of another infuriating thing about the entire HLC approach. You see it depicted in the dramatization that we saw in volume 1 of the Blood Tapes, which we're going to be revisiting during this talk. This very casual, kind of laid back, kind of calm, chill attitude when the call comes in and this elder is in his pajamas on the phone to this woman whose husband has just been hospitalized. And, he's even kind of taking time to kind of check his appearance in the mirror and make sure he's looking good while he's on, I think, speakerphone to another HLC elder getting their input. It's all very, very laid back, and a very big contrast to, the urgency with which you typically imagine clinicians going about patient care. Every second counts. Especially in cases where there's severe blood loss, the body's losing oxygen. There's such a thing as, what's it called now? Is it hypovolemic shock? But basically, regardless of how much oxygen there is in the body, if there isn't enough volume for the heart to be moving blood around, then the heart, the body goes into shock just because there isn't enough blood. So seconds count, and what's being encouraged, I'm seeing multiple times now in the propaganda that's shown to HLC elders, is, oh, just relax, just calm down a little bit, just relax and get all the information you need, irrespective of what the patient's needs are.
So once we've gathered the facts, what is the second step? The second step is to analyse the circumstances. Details determine decisions. Details determine decisions. And it's this fact and the way this is handled that can have a real bearing on whether a case has a successful outcome.
We'll define successful outcome.
Successful outcomes.
Oh.
Again, as has already realistically been mentioned in the programme so far, it may well be that an analysis of the circumstances indicates that the prognosis is not good. That's realistic, isn't it? So it is essential to bear in mind that a successful outcome, while not wanting to appear cold, a successful outcome nonetheless is when we have assisted our brothers and sisters to avoid a God-dishonouring blood transfusion.
Well, there you have it. A successful outcome is not the patient living. It's not the patient getting medical treatment so that they can live. A successful outcome, as far as the HLC are concerned, is a blood transfusion being avoided. That's a successful outcome. And he says, sorry if this appears cold. Yeah, damn right it appears cold, because it is cold, you monster. You are standing in front of a group of nodding automatons, and you are advocating this deadly ideology that your warped, twisted theology regarding blood transfusions is more important than someone living or dying. Oh, I'm going to have to calm down.
Even if that means that, in the short term at least, that their life is not prolonged.
At the risk of my blood pressure going up even further, I think it's worth repeating what he's just said in full context.
A successful outcome, nonetheless, is when we have assisted our brothers and sisters to avoid a God-dishonouring blood transfusion, even if that means that, in the short term at least, that their life is not prolonged.
That's his way of saying, even if that means they die. Even if that means in the short term at least, their life is not prolonged. You mean prolonged by receiving the medicine they need? This is messed up, isn't it? And this is what HLCs are all about. Making sure they get a successful outcome, irrespective of whether it means the patient dying. And he himself is identifying that his language is cold, his approach is cold. It's not about the patient living, it's about the dogma being adhered to, even if it means their life is not prolonged by medicine. Shame on you, Wayne Sorsby. Shame on you. And shame on any HLC elder or Jehovah's Witness or Jehovah's Witness apologist who thinks that this is acceptable language to be using or an acceptable approach to be taking when life is hanging in the balance.
So thirdly, we mentioned the third step is to determine the needed action and assistance. Now, what could that assistance involve? Well, it could be that there's actual medical information we can share. We could share appropriate strategies to avoid blood transfusion. We could provide a very relevant medical article. We could arrange for a consultation, doctor to doctor, or a transfer of the patient to another facility, perhaps particularly relevant to the UK. Of course, we wouldn't want to overlook a referral by the clinician. And we wouldn't want to jump too quickly to the idea of a transfer because, of course, there is a legal duty to refer the patient if, for example, the clinician is not willing to treat. Now, the details of a case, the circumstances, how a case is progressing, may mean that it's necessary to contact the HID, and of course, we're always happy to speak with you, brothers, whatever the need. Now, HLC Guidelines, Chapter 4, paragraphs 2 to 4, have some really good reminders in this regard. And just by way of a little side point, we did just want to point out what's mentioned. The sentence that reads, a key piece of information is what the doctor or treating team is recommending. Now, the reason we mention that is because for us in HID, that is a crucial piece of information. Now,
so that's interesting. He says, for us in HID. So he's just let slip Wayne Sorsby that he is on hospital information on the hospital information desk for the Britain branch. For us, I can't see why he would say for us in HID if he wasn't actually in HID. So useful to know that this is the sort of soulless cretin who is advising on not just cases in a certain locality, but across the length and breadth of Britain.
We can understand how you might want to make the call. You know about the situation of the patient, you know their condition, and the natural question is, what can we do? But it's very challenging for HID to give advice in the absence of information about what the treating team are currently recommending. So can we just mention that just as a little reminder? When contacting HID, it is really helpful to know what is being suggested presently regarding treatment. Point number 4 is to identify necessary follow-up. Now, this could be especially relevant to pediatric patients or elderly patients. They may and they do have ongoing needs that stretch perhaps way beyond the surgery. What assistance might they need? And of course, as has been mentioned, pediatric cases may require the involvement from the branch office. Especially is that the case if legal action is mentioned or suspected?
Well, the reason why legal action may be mentioned or suspected in a pediatric case is because what's happening is you're trying to get a minor to effectively martyr themselves. That's the successful outcome you're aiming for, is to get a minor who is in no position to know what their religious beliefs are or will be. And you're trying to engineer a medical case so that they don't receive the medical treatment they need. Their life is not prolonged due to the religious beliefs of the parents. That's why it's a legal issue.
And if media involvement arises as well, please contact the HID immediately. Please do bear in mind as well, we're talking about gathering the necessary information. Please bear in mind the guidelines, document retention, policies about completed information, and that's found in HLC Guidelines, Chapter 9, paragraphs 14 to 15. Again, as has already been mentioned, you brothers also can have ongoing assistance via the patient visitation group or congregation elders as a means of giving ongoing support to your brothers and sisters. So how to handle medical cases then, in harmony with the step-by-step approach of our theme? Well, here's where we revisit the video from Seminar 4. And as we consider the first section of this video, please just look out for how James effectively gathers information using appropriate questions, as we've already discussed. And also how the fact that James remains calm helps the situation. Let's consider the first section together.
So again, this is a dramatization that we've already seen in Volume 1.
I'm sorry, this is Aaron Andrews from the North Congregation. I just received an urgent call.
Okay, sorry about that. You said you got an urgent call?
Yes. From a sister in my congregation. Her name is Alice Diaz, and her husband was just admitted to the hospital. The doctors are saying that he needs a blood transfusion.
Okay, Aaron, are you at the hospital right now?
No, not at the moment.
What is our brother's name?
His name is Bill Diaz.
And is Bill baptized?
Yes, Brother Fowler, he's one of our pioneers.
Okay. And about how old is Bill?
I believe he's about 68.
And what hospital is he staying at?
They said they were at the regional hospital.
Now, I think you'd mentioned you're in the same congregation as our brother and sister. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Please remind me of the name of that congregation.
It's the North Congregation.
Now, when you spoke with Alice, did the doctor say why Bill needed blood?
You know, I'm so sorry, Brother Fowler. I don't know why she said that. Alice was really distressed when she called. I didn't think to ask her that.
That's understandable. Did Alice mention what the doctor had said, perhaps a diagnosis?
Again, I'm sorry, but I just woke up too, and all I remember is Alice asking for HLC involvement. I don't really recall any of the medical details. I'm so sorry, brother. I should have done more.
No, Aaron, you've already done a lot.
Did you see there how did James effectively gather information? Well, he asked good questions, didn't he? Fundamentally, are you at the hospital now? What's the brother's name? What's his spiritual standing? And about how old is the brother? And what were some other appropriate questions that James asked? Well, are the doctors saying why he needs blood? And have they said anything about a diagnosis? And did you notice how James remained calm and how that helped the situation? Well, he didn't mirror the stress of the brother on the phone, did he? Of course, that would have been easy to do, but instead he absorbed it. And he even reassured the brother, didn't he? He said, no, that's understandable. And he also said, no, you've already done a lot.
You've already done a lot by making this phone call so that I can start filling in a form that will swing into action this machinery that will interfere with the medical care of this Jehovah's Witness. And I'm sorry, again, I'm just not persuaded that the calmness that Wayne Soulsby is referring to here is such a great thing. This is a life or death, potentially a life or death situation. And HLC elders are being trained to act as though they have all the time in the world. That's what it looks like to me. And doesn't it make sense in a way that they should have such a laid-back attitude in life or death matters if we're learning that a successful outcome has nothing whatsoever to do with whether the patient lives or dies? It's about whether they stay faithful, whether the command to refuse blood transfusions is adhered to, because apparently the patient dying is just a momentary setback. That's the attitude they have.
So he really took that in his stride, didn't he, and ensured that he handled that conversation well. So in the next section of the video then, let's just see how an experienced HLC member, Timothy, gives meaningful direction by way of assistance to the newer member, James.
Varices are dilated veins in the distal esophagus or proximal stomach. This is a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot, isn't it? It's amazing how much information you need to swat up on when you're in the process of interfering with a medical case. But hey, James, in your pajamas, you've swung into action. You're riding to the rescue, and good for you for giving this a crack, having a crack at this. I'm sure with your last minute swatting up about what varices are, you'll be able to have meaningful input and provide insight that doctors who've spent years training and learning about human anatomy, that the doctors will find somehow helpful. It really frustrates me.
I need some help from a more experienced brother. Someone like Timothy Newman.
Hello?
Timothy, it's James. I'm sorry to call you so early, but I just got a call about a couple at Regional Hospital, the Diazes. I spoke to Alice, and her husband Bill has been admitted with a condition called esophageal varices, and the doctor's recommending a blood transfusion.
All right. Well, how much do you know about esophageal
Get it on
varices?
speakerphone. Get your
I did a little
cufflinks
research in
sorted.
the Merck manual, but that's about it.
Have a little look in the mirror. Just make sure you're looking a
Okay,
bit
to get the
dapper.
strategies document for gastrointestinal hemorrhage, you'll see that this condition is referred to in the contents of that document.
Okay, I have it.
Look at number 5B, bleeding gastroesophageal varices. It should be under the section upper GI bleeding.
Okay, got it.
Okay, now turn to page 6. There should be 6 management and interventional considerations.
I've already
yeah,
commented
wow.
on this, but it's
I never knew that was there.
so yeah,
Tim,
there he is,
would you be able
checking
to walk me
himself
through
out.
this? I'm not real familiar with this situation.
walk me through
I think
this.
the Diazes could use as much help as they can get.
Have a bit of a stretch.
Well, regional is 10 minutes from me. How about I get dressed and meet you at the hospital?
Thank you, Tim. I'm really going to appreciate having you there.
You have to laugh or you'll cry.
Excellent. So how then did Timothy give James meaningful direction as a way of assistance? Well, interestingly, he asked James what he already knew, didn't he? And that's a very good question, isn't it? What do you already know? Let's find out where you are, and then we can know where to go from here. And speaking about where to go from there, Timothy certainly knew his references, didn't he? He knew the right strategies document, he knew the right section, he knew the right page, he knew the right subsection.
He knew his references. He knew his way around the HLC documentation. Not he knew his medicine. Not he knew about patient care or how to treat people in life or death situations. Just he knew the documentation well. And if a HLC elder knows the documentation well, they're treated as though they can go toe to toe with an actual clinician.
And he shared that with James, didn't he, by way of assistance? And of course, he offered to go with him to hospital, which evidently meant a great deal to James. So by way then of a review of that video as a whole, what can we take away? Well, taking our time when handling phone calls, ensuring that we get a full, complete picture.
Taking our time, he said it again. This is like a main point for him, isn't it? It's not enough for him to say it maybe once or even twice. What are we on now? The third or fourth time, if not more, that he's told HLC elders to either be calm or take their time. And he's on the HID. He's on the hospital information desk. This is the casual approach that they have.
By asking the right questions. And perhaps a rhetorical question, if we are a more experienced HLC member, will you be a Timothy to the James? Will you share your information? Will you give newer members the support that they need? And will you help them become as familiar with the references as you are? Will you give them a net, so to speak, rather than just giving them a fish? Help them to become familiar with the tools. By doing this, and many other things, all of the brothers on the committee will handle medical cases effectively. It is also the case that training must be ongoing. Now that's whether we're newer HLC members or experienced HLC members. Now, if a newer HLC member is to really be dialed into training, then of course they'll need to maintain a positive view of training. It's not a quick job, is it? Okay, I've got that. It's ongoing. And so it goes with experienced HLC members as well, because of course roles on the committee change. Therefore, there is always a need for training as ones receive additional responsibilities. Speaking of roles on the committee, it is true that all members of the committee should become familiar with all aspects of the assignment. For example, giving presentations, building relationships with clinicians. Now, Of course, some on the committee may be more naturally
Sorry, I
gifted
just need
in
to repeat
certain
that because
areas,
my mind was wandering.
should become
It's
familiar
quite dull.
with all aspects of the assignment.
I was reading
For
the
example,
comments.
giving presentations. Roles on the committee change. Therefore, there is always a need for training as ones receive additional responsibilities. Speaking of roles on the committee, it is true that all members of the committee should become familiar with all aspects of the assignment. For example, giving presentations, building relationships with clinicians. Now,
He's just mentioned giving presentations and building relationships with clinicians. It seems he's going to go into this in more detail, but this is essentially HLC's, Hospital Liaison Committees, sweet-talking their way into the hospitals so that they can receive red carpet treatment when a Jehovah's Witness is admitted. In some cases in the UK, they've even managed to write the hospital's policy when it comes to Jehovah's Witnesses and arrange for it to be so that the HLC gets contacted every time a Jehovah's Witness gets admitted. So it's really quite dangerous stuff, and you can kind of understand it from the perspective of the hospital, because they're wanting to be as open-minded and progressive as possible. They're trying to, be understanding and sensitive to, the needs of religious minorities. You can kind of understand where they're coming from, but it's more a case of hospital liaison committees exploiting this well-meaning approach that hospitals take, because whereas other faith communities might simply want to give words of comfort or say prayers at the bedside or that kind of thing, we've heard in this presentation that a successful outcome could involve the patient's death. A successful outcome is a blood transfusion being refused, period, end of discussion. So what he's describing here now, or beginning to describe, is the process whereby HLCs ingratiate themselves with hospital staff so that they can get fast-tracked through the system whenever a Jehovah's Witness gets hospitalized.
of course, some on the committee may be more naturally gifted in certain areas. However, all members should become familiar with all aspects. And it's a very healthy thing to periodically review the roles and responsibilities on the committee. How are they being handled? And HLC Guidelines Chapter 4, paragraphs 6 to 16, very, very relevant. Now, just in this regard, with a view to roles and responsibilities, a good exercise as a committee, which I'm sure some, if not all of you, will have done recently, is just to consider HLC Guidelines Chapter 4, paragraph 7, and all the roles and responsibilities mentioned there. And perhaps just to discuss as a committee, are we in the best place we can be to fulfill all of these roles and responsibilities? Do we need to make any changes? Do we need to do more training? Do we need to recommend new members? Let's just briefly mention qualities that are needed by those who give training. Well, our words aren't the only way we train others, is it? We train by our example. So point number one is that those assigned to train themselves need to have an exemplary attitude toward the assignment and the work. Also, what's needed is a genuine interest in others, because training isn't just a cold transaction, is it? It's an investment. And so therefore the trainer is interested in, well, how is the new member using the information that's been given? How will they use it? What help might they need to use it? Patience, discernment, adaptability is going to be needed because, of course, new members will differ in how they absorb things and how quickly they absorb things. Good organisation is, of course, a must. And crucially, the ability to convey complex information in a simple manner. Jesus was so good at that, wasn't he? And it reminded me of the quote that's attributed to Einstein. If you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough.
Oh, now he's quoting Einstein. So, well, I've heard it all now. Einstein's being quoted in a HLC video conference. Isn't it interesting how scientific minds or scientific thinkers, respected scientists of yore, if they say something that can be just kind of casually quoted in Jehovah's Witness propaganda that serves their purpose, suddenly it's relevant. But overall, Jehovah's Witnesses have an extremely backward approach to science, especially in the areas of evolution, or in the area of evolution. So, never thought I'd hear Einstein get quoted in a HLC seminar.
So a lot is on us as trainers, isn't it? If we're going to be effective in training. Finally, let's just consider and really remind ourselves of the crucial point that prayerful reliance on Jehovah is essential in caring for our assignment. It is a spiritual assignment. It's not an end in itself, is it? We don't just get involved in these medical matters because we find it interesting. It's because Jehovah's commands are involved. And as Brother Norton already said, a great deal of joy will come from helping others, giving them assistance, training, encouragement. That's going to bring happiness to everybody on the committee. And just to stress, all the committee benefit when the chairman takes the lead in arranging training. When he helps new members to become familiar with the tools and how best to use them in their activity. If he delegates responsibilities on the committee. And of course, as mentioned, those roles and responsibilities on the committee can be periodically reviewed. Most importantly of all, brothers, when handling medical cases, keep the matter before Jehovah in prayer, and you will experience his support. If we rely on Jehovah, then we will be thankful that we did our best, whether newer members, more experienced, in helping our brothers and sisters keep their integrity in tremendously difficult situations. And that will be no matter what the outcome is in the short term.
No matter what he said it again. No matter what the outcome is in the short term. You might be confused if you hear him use that word or that terminology if you've never been a Jehovah's Witness. What does short term mean? He's talking about in the context of everlasting life. That's what he means by short term. So even if the outcome is that someone dies in the short term, at least we've helped them stay faithful in the long term so that they can be resurrected. This is the fanaticism that's driving the HLC, and in this case, someone who actually works on the HID, the Hospital Information Department, or desk, because he couldn't help but just mention that in passing earlier on in his talk, even though he didn't need to. So thank you for that, by the way, Wayne Salisbury. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a clue who you are. But now I can start to piece together who's on the HID in Britain.
So Brother Mark Tarrant from the London South HLC will now present the part, Handling Medical Cases, Lessons Learned from Experienced HLC Members.
So we will be reviewing that video by Brother Tarrant in the Blood Tapes Volume 4. That's coming up in our next episode. I think it's good to leave it there. I can only handle this HLC video seminar from 2022 in 20-minute or so chunks. We've just watched, I think, 26 minutes, so that was quite a long one. But it was interspersed with, again, the dramatization that we saw in Volume 1. I don't want to kind of revisit too much what was said because I'm still seething. I will, however, display some of your comments because I was monitoring the live chat during that video. Petra Grundqvist says, did you ever hear from the Jehovah's Witness person that promised to talk during a live but never showed up? Yes, they emailed later on and apologized, but I don't know. You can't get much clearer than, this is the time when we're going to do the live stream. Here's a link in advance. And then later they say, oh, really? Was that the time? I don't know. Maybe they'll come back. Who knows? But I'm not going to. So it may have been a bit confusing because it probably popped up in your feed, but I later deleted it because we didn't end up having a debate. So that's the only reason it got deleted. Jean Walker says, hi, y'all. I couldn't help but think back when they did this disgraceful video of Jason Zepter. I'm going to correct you there. It was Jared Septer. Jared spelt Jerod. Septer spelt Septer. And I did a video called The Martyrdom of Jared Septer, who died due to the no blood policy, and they instrumentalized the tragedy in their propaganda. They totally did. They exploited the death of a child of Jehovah's Witnesses. And, you know, spoiler alert, the story had a happily ever after because the parents, or the father at least, ended up becoming a circus overseer. So, hey, everything's fine now because the father's a circus overseer, the father who helped arrange for his son to die due to a religious belief that the son was too young to have. Julie Higby says, as a nurse myself, it's incredibly insulting. I can imagine if you're a medical professional watching this, you're just going to have your head in your hands at how arrogant these individuals are in assuming that they should have any say whatsoever in complicated medical matters just because they've swatted up on a worksheet or, you know, reviewed some kind of propaganda in advance. It is insulting. I understand entirely your feelings there. Tia Tooley says how they think they are better than doctors. Agreed. Tommy Vask says, but maybe they worked as window cleaners at a hospital. Nice one, Tommy. I mean, they're not all window cleaners, to be fair. I guess it's a little bit of an insult, you know, kind of a stereotype. But you know, even no matter how well qualified they are, if they haven't received medical training, they should be nowhere near a medical case where someone is receiving potentially life or death treatment. They should not be interfering in those matters. Jenna Wellborn says, I don't know how you do this, Lloyd. Well, in short bursts, Jenna, is how I do it. That's why I'm reviewing this propaganda in, you know, volume by volume, episode by episode, because I think all of this needs to be seen. And in a way, it's kind of easier for me to do it with the help of you guys, with, you know, in a live stream format. A little bit more. If it's just me in a room facing a camera with no outside input whatsoever, I think it would be more challenging. Sabrina V. Kraft says elders and the organisation and the HLC are consistently participants in negligent homicide when they pressure the vulnerable and grieving to refuse life-saving blood. Negligent homicide atrocity. Hard to argue with you. I mean, yeah, that they're certainly making themselves complicit in the death of a patient, the avoidable death of a patient, especially when they're freely admitting that it's a successful outcome, even if the patient dies, so long as blood has been refused. Kevin Johnson says, my dad was an elder. Kevin was talking about his dad dying, but let me know privately that he disagreed with the blood issues and disagreed that me being gay was wrong and the reason I am shunned. I think that kind of underscores just how nuanced Jehovah's Witness belief is, and HLCs would have doctors and hospital trusts believe that the abstinence of blood is universal among Jehovah's Witnesses. They completely ignore the nuance and the fact that people are going to have varying degrees of confidence in the blood teaching, and certainly when push comes to shove, and when the Grim Reaper is at the gates or by the bedside, literally in the form of the HLC elders, and their life is ebbing away, who knows what decision they might want to take? Who knows? Zidlik says, when my brother had cancer, my parents always seemed more concerned about him not getting blood than getting better. And when I broke my arm and needed surgery, blood was a bigger concern to my dad. That sounds completely... that corresponds with my experience of the attitude that Jehovah's Witnesses have in these matters. Mulder Scully says, my elder dad had a heart attack 5 years ago, and the elders were the first at the hospital to make sure there was no transfusion. Then the elders told me members come with benefits. Sounds weird thing to say. Nickon Snow says, with elderly devout parents in, this terrifies me. I would be terrified. I mean, I guess I do have at least a devout parent who's in, and I don't want harm to befall him, irrespective of the fact that we don't have a relationship anymore, and my view of him is somewhat eroded over time. But yeah, this is what we're up against, folks. This is the mentality. This is the coldness. He even used the word cold when describing what the end game is. This is the coldness that we're up against. They don't care if it kills the patient. They just want the patient to refuse blood. Julie Higby says, I had 2 surgeries in the last 7 weeks and finally had to change my DPOA because my father didn't want to honour my wishes of taking blood if necessary. Yeah, that's an important reminder if you're watching. Maybe you have exited the Jehovah's Witness religion only recently and you still have documents filed with your clinician, with your GP or whoever, indicating that if you are in any way incapacitated and unable to speak for yourself, blood should automatically be not administered to you. The default decision is that you don't want to receive blood, and it's an important reminder that if you're in that position of having woken up, you definitely need to be making sure that your GP has no documentation on them that might in any way hamper the ability of the doctors to treat you. Sabrina V. Kraft says, in Montana, Jehovah's Witnesses are always on hospital radars for the HLC's alert and attention. Patients are often visited with no contact with the local congregations. They magically show up unexpectedly. I mean, I'll have to take your word for it, but it really doesn't surprise me, given the fact that, again, they make it their business to cozy up to hospitals and basically make sure that their interests are cared for and that they can be fast-tracked into the hospital wards according to what they want rather than what the patient needs. Julie Higby says the request should only come from the patient or medical staff. Very true. I think Julie's talking about HLC involvement, which, again, it's on the form. Has the patient requested HLC involvement almost as an afterthought? JR, or is it Junior Diablo? How do the elders know when a member is in hospital? Couldn't they go without them knowing? I think I mean, you would like to think that it would be possible to go to a hospital as a Jehovah's Witness and have treatment involving a blood transfusion without your local elders knowing. But in practicality, when you are a Jehovah's Witness, you're part of an insular community where everyone knows everyone else's business, and it's hard to so much as sneeze without someone else knowing. So, yeah, word gets around quickly. Never underestimate the efficiency of the Jehovah's Witness grapevine. If someone gets hospitalized, typically word's going to get around quickly, and elders are going to know fairly quickly, as is depicted in the dramatization that we briefly saw. Tommy Vask says, it's so sad to hear that a person can have quite a bit of rationality and clear thinking, like Kevin's dad, but still let themselves be persuaded or pressured into refusing blood. It is, indeed. And this is, again, the nuance of Jehovah's Witness belief. It's not a black and white issue where everyone... I guess the governing body like to tell us that everyone's on the same page and everyone has the same level of conviction, but there's a major clue in just what we've heard today, where they're filling out the form, and one of the questions is, what's the level of conviction? How serious is the patient about refusing blood? So they're even acknowledging on their own form the fact that different individuals who profess to be Jehovah's Witnesses can have varying levels of commitment to the blood teaching. Sabina V. Kraft says the HLC and the organization dismiss the rules of the HIPAA in the United States. Often the patient can be inactive or disassociated secretly, and still here in Montana, the HLC shows up anyway and questions the patient. We've discussed before about HIPAA violations, and I'm not a legal expert, but I think what we can safely say is that the material that we've been watching is a gross violation of patient privacy. When we reach the point where elders are being encouraged to write down lab values so that they can notice a pattern, with or without the consent of the patient to the whole process. Make of that what you will. By the way, I'm going to take my headphones off because I've realized I don't need them quite at this point, because there's no longer a video being played. Ludivine Carmen Sarah Aicha Passau, apologies if I've mispronounced, says, take your time. The patient of a catastrophic accident needs you to take your time. Yeah, that was coming across loud and clear, actually, in that talk. It was repeatedly mentioned that HLC elders need to have a casual, sort of laid-back attitude in life or death situations. Trish Heggie says, I'm sorry, this is surely manslaughter or murder. Look, again, we're straying into, legal questions here, but I think it's safe to say that a lot of what we're seeing goes against, if not the law, then at least the spirit of the law in many countries. And the reason why they're able to do this is simply because people don't know. It's been alluded already in this video seminar earlier on. I think it was in the last part, the last volume, that ordinary Jehovah's Witnesses don't know what HLC members are getting up to. It's a mystery even to rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses what HLCs are doing. So if even your average Jehovah's Witness doesn't know what HLCs are doing and why they're doing it, how on earth are doctors and clinicians and medical workers going to understand, the true horror of what's happening? So essentially, HLCs are capitalizing on the ignorance of the medical community and more broadly society in general. I think if everyone who needs to know what's in these videos knew what's in these videos, I'll go as far as to say I don't think HLCs would even be a thing in many countries. I think they would be shut down because it's just wrong. You know, what's happening here, irrespective of whether it's a direct HIPAA violation, this is some seriously shady stuff, isn't it? That's the bare minimum we can say about it. Sabrina V. Kraft says, please remove the blood cards from wallets. The hospital staff may see it and wait to talk to family too late to get life-saving blood to the patient in time. Thank you again for that reminder. Nikon Snow says, horrifying, reflecting the thoughts, I'm sure, of many of us watching this. Petra Grunquist says, but that's just sick and sad. So it is a power thing then. I think Petra left this comment around the time that Wayne Salisbury sort of casually remarked that, cold though it may sound, you know, a successful outcome is that the blood teaching is adhered to, irrespective of whether the patient's life is not prolonged. In other words, irrespective of whether the patient dies. I mean, the very fact that he could dance around that. This is the sort of man Wayne Salisbury is, that he will use word salads to dress up the fact that people are dying over this, that HLCs are complicit in people dying. That's the sort of man he is. And though I try as much as possible on this channel to differentiate between Jehovah's Witnesses and the organization that leads them, and I do think that the vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses, including Jehovah's Witness elders, are mostly kind people who are being led along, being lied to. I do think every now and then you do get individuals who gravitate towards the organization because it speaks to their own coldness and their own psychoses almost. And I don't know, I don't like the look or sound of this Wayne Salisbury character, and it disturbs me that he is on the hospital information desk in the Britain branch handing out this sort of advice to hospital liaison committees the length and breadth of Britain. Sarah T says, this clip needs to be seen by all medical professionals who think HLC elders are simply there to comfort their patients. Yes, please get the word out on this. I really wish more people could see this material, and that's why I'm combing through it almost forensically, rather than simply giving you like a highlights. I think frankly every minute of this video conference needs to be seen, because we need the context. We need to see what's being said at these conferences. It's not like just an ordinary convention where people are being indoctrinated into a particular religion. This is specific guidance being given to a group of men who make it their business to arrange affairs so that a certain group of patients martyr themselves. Julie Higby says, best life, whoops, I mean death ever. Sorry, I mucked up your quip. But yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses pride themselves on having the best life ever, and as I've repeatedly argued, it very quickly becomes the best death ever if you fall foul of, well, if fate works against you, or circumstances work against you when it comes to the blood teaching. Sabrina says, control, intimidation, threats, high pressure tactics are all tools to persuade patients and family to never take blood in any case. Minors love and trust parents to look out for their welfare and interest. Yes. The fact that it's again one thing for grown Jehovah's Witnesses to, due to their indoctrination, perhaps since childhood, make a determination about what medical treatment they want to accept or refuse. But for them to make assumptions about their children who are too young to decide on these things is completely, well, I mean, it's all wrong, isn't it? But killing kids, really? You know? So I agree with you there, Sabrina. Loxana says, if it wasn't for this disgusting cult, my brother would be alive. I'm sorry to hear that, Loxana. I don't know under what circumstances your brother died, but you do have my condolences. Julie Higby says, and can we talk about how unrealistic this dramatization is? Bleeding esophageal varices is a true medical emergency. There wouldn't be the casual approach shown here. Yeah, just that image of him putting the guy on speakerphone and checking his appearance in the mirror as though he's got all the time in the world. Just, Nikon Snow says, these people are not medical professionals. What on earth? Amen to that. Sorry, this is getting me worked up. I just resigned my mother's card last week and I hate it. Resigned? Or re-signed, I think is what you mean. Okay, yeah. So I think you mean the DPA card. Sorry to hear that. Junior Diablo says, so this HLC elder could be a car mechanic by day and then advise members on blood rules at other times. Yeah, that's the arrogance that we've just seen on full display. Sabrina says, remember, many elders and ministerial servants may not even be high school graduates. Many have minimal education. Education is not a priority with Jehovah's Witnesses, yet they pretend to give good advice. Yeah, I mean, again, even if they were university educated, if they've not received medical training specifically in the area of concern or in the field that's relevant to the patient's care, it doesn't matter if they have a PhD, as far as I'm concerned. But I do take your point that with many of these elders, you're lucky if they have a high school education, because in many cases they've been homeschooled, you know, which it is disturbing, isn't it? It is disturbing to think about. Liz Straub says, hello everyone, I'm only able to be here today because of 9 transfusions I had 25 years ago when I bled out after giving birth. I was made to feel so bad about it, but I lived to raise my 3 children. Good for you, Liz. Good for you for doing the best both for you and for your children, so that your children had a mother to be there for them. So I'm really pleased to hear that this horrendous dogma and the HLC goons who enforce it had no negative impacts on you, at least in this situation. Austrian Wolf says, non-professionals teaching other non-professionals in telling doctors how to best do their job. That pretty much sums up what we've just seen. And Irina Turner says the talk is so disgusting. Also pretty well sums up what we've just seen. So that's pretty much all I wanted to share with you. I am currently in the process of preparing the rebuttals for the 2023 convention. If, by the way, anyone happens to have any footage from the convention that they want to share with me, I could do with some. I do have all of the convention, but currently the files I have are quite low resolution. So if anyone can help me out with some high resolution footage of the convention, the email address to use is jwwatchorg jwwatchorg@gmail.com. So that's jwwatchorg@gmail.com. And you can also use that email address if you're interested in being interviewed on the channel. But that's about all we have time for, because I need to calm down from what we've just watched. It's important that this information gets out there. And again, if you can in any way, shape or form, help spread the word, and specifically make sure that this information makes its way in front of medical professionals, I think you would be doing a huge service, certainly to Jehovah's Witnesses in your community. But that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, everyone.